were you greatly influenced by the literature of today in which this is reflected? I mean, the more obvious one, Auden's Age of Anxiety, kind of lends itself.
Yes, and Eliot's Wasteland. Now, I was not so much influenced by them, but I was confirmed by them. My real period in which I was mostly influenced was when I read first Kierkegaard 50 years ago, then when I read Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, then when I was a colleague of Heidegger, the philosopher, and met Jaspers and the other existentialists. Then a little bit later, I was deeply impressed by the novels of Kafka.
When we met last, you were working very closely in another field of art, and much more in the visual arts, in painting, and tried to relate that to theological thought. I wonder what you did in the meantime to follow up that trend of thought.
Now, I had to give, perhaps you have heard about it, several lectures about religion and art, yes. One in the National Gallery in Washington and on some other places. And I like this very much and have to speak about it during the next month several times. Now, I will show you why I do this. For instance, when I give a lecture on Renaissance, on that period, then I can speak about the philosophical principles of the Renaissance. I can say, for instance, that in the Renaissance, nature becomes visible and man goes into the center instead of God. Mm-hmm. Now, when I say such a thing, I think it's very useful for myself and for my students to look at such a picture as, for instance, here, by Hieronymus Bosch, one of the first who opens up nature, makes nature more than only a background. Nature is something independent here, as it became in the whole Renaissance. And when we today boast in our natural science, it has something to do with such a picture, namely the opening up of nature. Now that's the one thing in it. Then obviously man, namely John on Patmos, writing the visions about the end of the world, is in the center. And the interesting thing are the two diagonals. The one starting with the divine, represented by Mary in the Son, and then the angels, and then men, and then here on the right side, the demonic world. And then the other diagonal coming from there, having a wonderful tree, going through men to the animal, to this little bird here. So we have the whole universe connected, centered in man, and especially in the human face, which means in the Renaissance philosophy, man's rational power. Now that's one example.
No, that's all very well and much more representative. Now if you take a modern piece like Picasso's Guernica here, it would be much more difficult to give an analysis like that because nothing is so obviously in the foreground. Wouldn't you think so?
Oh, I would think very much so. And I would say if you have to compare this with something I said before, it's with Kafka. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with respect to anxiety. Now, look at the different faces of men and animals here. They are full of anxiety about the terrible catastrophe which came over this little Spanish town before the Second World War, when the Nazis and the fascists bombed it. Now, this is Guernica, the little town which was destroyed. Now, what he does here is not to describe scenes which every photographer could take, but to express the mood of the people, and express it in terms of this shock and this tremendous anxiety which is produced by the end of the world, which it really was for the inhabitants of this little town. Now this is characteristical not only for Picasso, but for all modern art. They don't want to describe the surface of the world in the same way in which former art, even this Renaissance art, does. But they want to show that our world is in pieces, is disrupted. And therefore, sometimes in my lectures, when I am asked, tell me a truly Protestant picture of today, which is painted today, then I say go to Picasso's Guernica picture, because there you see the world in pieces. And that's the one side which Protestantism always emphasizes and must emphasize. It's not the whole of Protestantism, but it's the one side. And what is nearest to our present mind is just this side.
If we relate theology to art this way, what does it do to the usual way theology is defined?
Now, what do you mean with the usual way? It's very hard to say what the usual way is, but you have something in mind, certainly.
I would think a definition of doctrine or a presentation of the Christian faith.
Yes, now that's, these two things are often used, I agree with you. But each of them is terribly difficult, and you know, I have another definition, and I will repeat it now, since you asked me that question. I believe faith, that word, should be defined as a state of being ultimately concerned. Now, this is like a stumbling block for some people. They will be shocked by it. Certainly, I know they are. But I insist on it because I believe it's perhaps the best way of understanding the reality and the seriousness of religion and of faith. Now, ultimately concerned means man has many concerns. Artistic concerns, daily life concerns, food and clothes, and concern about friends, about women, about everything, and men, marriage and children, and everything. But there's one concern I believe every human being has, namely the concern about what his life as a whole does mean. And that's what I call ultimate concern. Every faith expresses itself in some ideas, in some actions, or as I would call them, in some symbols. Symbols are expressions of faith, whether it's success, or whether it's the nation, or whether it's one human being, which is your ultimate concern, or whether it's some being which is called God. In any case, they are symbols of our ultimate concern. They express it. And now I come to the task of theology. And that's my whole life's work of which I am speaking now. Namely, theology has to show what these symbols mean. What kind of faith is behind them. Not only behind the Christian symbols, but also symbols like nation or success or progress or science. They all can become symbols of an ultimate concern.
The function of the theologian, then, is to investigate into the symbols.
Yes, certainly. That's what I always have said and defended. Now, the question is how to do it and what to do with these symbols. You can say they all are something which must be removed. And there are important theologians today who want to remove all symbols. I don't believe they are right. There is no religion without symbols. There is no any faith without a symbolic expression. So we must not remove them. On the other hand, we cannot take them simply literally and speak of them as if it were a story which happens here in our room. But it's something which expresses and points to something else, namely to our ultimate concern.